The shabby man they once mocked returned, this time in a sharp suit, eyes burning with quiet power. With a single sentence, he turned their world upside down. He owned the copper lantern now. But what came next would expose secrets no one expected. First, let's go back to the beginning. The copper lantern prided itself on appearances. Every inch of the place was curated to impress, from the glittering chandeliers to the thick velvet drapes that seemed to hush any voice not backed by wealth. Outside, the valet stand brimmed with polished Bentleys and gleaming Teslas, each car a badge of success, a silent declaration that its owner belonged. Inside, the waiters floated like shadows, their stiff vests and muted ties blending with the restaurant's low golden light. It was a world where your shoes spoke louder than your words, and your jacket decided your worth before you opened your mouth. Into this careful illusion stepped Eddie Harper, the floorboards beneath his boots creaking with every hesitant step. His coat hung from his shoulders like a discarded tarp, threadbare at the seams and darkened by years of hard weather. His jeans, stained and frayed, spoke not of fashion but of use, and his beanie, pulled low against the cold, barely hid the silver creeping into his hair. Heads turned, but not out of kindness. There was a subtle, sharp pulling back of posture, as if Eddie carried with him an invisible contagion no one wished to catch. At the host stand, Jenna Reed forced a brittle smile, her manicured fingers tightening around the reservation book. She leaned discreetly toward Leon Bennett, who stood nearby with the rigid posture of a man who saw himself as a gatekeeper. His eyes, sharp and appraising, ran over Eddie like a scanner programmed to detect undesirables. Leon stepped forward with mechanical politeness, placing himself squarely between Eddie and any chance of acceptance. "Sorry, sir," he said, voice smooth as glass but cold beneath it. "We're fully booked tonight." Eddie paused, his breath fogging slightly in the overheated room. His voice, when it came, was low, unthreatening. "Just a small table. I won't be any trouble." Leon's lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm afraid we can't accommodate walk-ins, especially without a reservation." The words weren't spoken cruelly, but cruelty was embedded in their delivery. Nearby, a table of diners dressed in silk and cashmere glanced over, barely disguising their amusement. Their laughter, light but cutting, slashed across the room. Eddie caught it in the gut, feeling not just the sting of rejection but the sharper wound of being seen as less than human. His stomach growled beneath his layers, a visceral reminder of why he had come in the first place. But his pride, what remained of it, hardened inside him like stone. Without another word, Eddie dipped his head slightly, a ghost of a nod, and turned for the door. The blast of cold that greeted him was almost welcome compared to the suffocating warmth inside. No one behind those velvet curtains would ever have guessed the truth. That beneath the worn clothing and weathered skin stood a man who had once been applauded by CEOs, interviewed by journalists, envied by tycoons. A man who had lost everything by trusting too much, and who, tonight, had come not for a meal, but for something far more important. And they had just failed the test. Once upon a time, the name Eddie Harper had echoed through the halls of Silicon Valley like a war drum. At 29, he had cracked a code no one else could, building an AI platform so elegant, so ruthlessly efficient, that investors threw blank checks at his feet. Within 18 months, his fledgling company was absorbed by a tech giant in a deal rumored to be worth 9 figures. Journalists had lined up for interviews, plastering his boyish grin across glossy magazines under headlines calling him the savior of the future. Venture capitalists fought over who would fund his next idea. Luxury suites, champagne-fueled conferences, private jets, those had been the oxygen he breathed. But success, Eddie learned, is a fragile currency. It buys friends like counterfeit bills, crisp and convincing until the first real test comes. The fall wasn't sudden. It crept in, disguised as opportunity. A few investments pitched by trusted advisors that soured overnight. Partnerships that began with firm handshakes and ended with lawsuits. A marriage that once felt like sanctuary, dissolving into a battlefield where money and loyalty were both weapons and casualties. By 35, Eddie Harper had traded in tailored suits for courtroom summonses and silent bank accounts. Yet the worst loss wasn't the millions. It was the disillusionment. The realization that in the world he had built, love, trust, and friendship had all carried invisible price tags. For a time, Eddie disappeared. No headlines, no LinkedIn updates, no new startups. He lived out of cheap motels and battered trailers, taking odd consulting jobs under fake names when he needed to eat. He learned how to tune out the noise, how to spot sincerity in a glance and betrayal in a handshake. He found among farmers and factory workers the kind of character he had never encountered in boardrooms. Years passed. Eddie rebuilt himself not with wealth, but with something harder to come by: clarity. He no longer needed adoration. He craved authenticity. When whispers of the Copper Lantern reached him, they caught his ear not because of nostalgia for luxury, but because of the irony. A restaurant designed to showcase status, now hemorrhaging money behind velvet curtains. Owned by a man too proud to ask for help, too desperate to refuse it. The temptation wasn't in the profit. Eddie could have made far more elsewhere. It was in the challenge. The idea of breathing life into a place so spiritually bankrupt that it couldn't even recognize the humanity of a guest in need. Tonight wasn't a whim. Eddie had come with a purpose sharpened by years of pain and introspection. He wanted to see for himself if the Copper Lantern deserved saving, or if it needed to be torn down and reborn. And by the time the door had swung closed behind him, he had all the answers he needed. The private dining room at the Copper Lantern felt suffocating, as if the heavy oak-paneled walls themselves were pressing inward. Waiters in crisp black uniforms murmured in tight clusters, their eyes darting toward the closed door. Jenna Reed stood near the podium, twisting the silver bracelet on her wrist until it bit into her skin, while Leon Bennett planted himself rigidly in front of the fireplace, jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. They had been summoned without explanation. Whispers swirled, rumors of a sale, of bankruptcy, of a new owner too ashamed to face them directly. Leon, who had built his tiny kingdom on polished shoes and exclusionary smiles, told himself it was probably an investor looking for a tax shelter. Someone who would let him run things as he always had. The door creaked open. Every conversation snapped into silence. A man stepped through the threshold, clean-shaven, shoulders squared beneath a sharply cut gray suit. His shoes, black and unscuffed, tapped with quiet authority across the marble floor. Though he carried himself with effortless confidence, there was something almost ghostly about him, a flicker of memory just beyond full recognition. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. Leon's face drained of color. It was the man they had turned away. But this time there was no tattered coat, no battered boots, no signs of vulnerability to excuse their contempt. Eddie Harper's voice was calm, but the air in the room seemed to vibrate with the weight of it. "I'm Eddie Harper," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, pinning each staff member where they stood. "And as of this morning, I'm the new owner of the Copper Lantern." A collective gasp rippled through the room, like the sudden intake of breath before a drowning man surfaces or sinks. Leon stumbled forward, grasping for control. This must be a mistake. Some misunderstanding." "No mistake," Eddie cut him off, voice still even but edged now with steel. 2 weeks ago, I walked into this restaurant. I came not looking for favors, not flaunting wealth or status. I came looking for respect. I saw what this place truly values, and what it doesn't. Jenna, her voice small and shaking, whispered, We didn't know." "You didn't ask," Eddie said sharply. His eyes, once kind, were now flinty with disappointment. "You judged, instantly, completely. You measured a man's worth by the cut of his coat and the shine of his shoes. And you failed." He let the words hang heavy in the room, forcing every person to sit in the discomfort they had created. Eddie straightened, his presence somehow expanding, filling every shadowed corner. "From this moment forward, this place will change. It needs new leadership, and more importantly, a new heart. Those willing to unlearn what they think they know about people are welcome to stay. But if you believe a suit makes a soul, I suggest you leave." Silence reigned. No protests, no whispered justifications. Only the heavy, shameful realization of opportunity lost. Leon, his pride shredded, grabbed his leather portfolio and slipped out the side door without a glance back. For the first time in years, the Copper Lantern felt honest, stripped of its illusions, standing at the crossroads between what it had been and what it could yet become. The Copper Lantern did not change overnight, but under Eddie Harper's steady hand, it changed in ways that mattered. Gone were the days when polished marble floors and exclusive clientele were the restaurant's only pride. Eddie stripped away the brittle pretensions that had once defined the place, replacing them with something sturdier, something alive. He introduced community nights every Thursday, where the door swung open to anyone, no matter their shoes, their jacket, or the size of their bank account. Lawyers sat next to laborers, teachers next to truckers. At those tables, names mattered more than titles, and conversations bloomed over plates of roasted vegetables and handmade bread. Eddie launched scholarship programs for aspiring chefs who had the passion but not the pedigree. Young cooks, many who had once believed places like the Copper Lantern were far beyond their reach, now bustled in the gleaming kitchen, sleeves rolled up, ambition burning bright behind their eyes. Their food wasn't just technically perfect, it was soulful, carrying the stories of their grandmother's recipes and the spice markets of their hometowns. He forged partnerships with local farmers and artisans, bringing in heirloom tomatoes still warm from the sun and honey so fresh it tasted of wildflowers. The menus changed with the seasons now, honoring the land as much as the people who tended it. What was once a sterile temple of status became a living, breathing home. The laughter returned first, tentative at first, like the shy green buds of spring, and then fully, richly. Where there had been tension, there was now warmth. Where there had been judgment, there was now welcome. Wealthy patrons still came, but they blended into a crowd that no longer cared about cufflinks and diamond earrings. It wasn't the clothes that set anyone apart anymore. It was the kindness in their eyes. Late one evening, after the last dessert plates were cleared and only the soft crackle of the fire filled the air, Jenna Reed, now promoted to manager, found Eddie sitting alone at the polished mahogany bar. He wasn't sipping brandy or swirling whiskey, just a plain ceramic mug of black coffee, cradled in both hands like a small, quiet victory. She approached slowly, a different woman from the one who had once whispered judgments behind a host stand. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling with sincerity, "for giving us a second chance." Eddie turned to her, and for a moment, the years of weathered hardship seemed to lift from his face. He smiled, a real, slow smile that lit his eyes. "Everyone deserves one," he said, "if they're willing to earn it." Outside, the wind howled down the narrow streets, rattling the bare branches against shuttered windows, just as it had the night Eddie had first been turned away. But inside the Copper Lantern, the cold could not penetrate. The warmth was thicker than the fireplace's heat. It radiated from the clatter of plates, the hum of shared stories, the renewed heart beating at the center of a place that had finally remembered what it meant to serve. A place redeemed, not by wealth, but by grace.